Hi, good evening, C3 parents. I hope you're doing well. I've started a bit early, so we're going to give people time to join us. We are going to talk about basically one of the questions that keeps on popping up on social media currently is I've got a child that is behaving out of character. And what they mean by out of character, sorry, I just need to move my phone away so it doesn't distract me. Right. Please, when you're here, say hi. Let me know that you're here. If you have any questions, any specific battle that you have right now with your kid, we can dive into it. We can deep dive into it. It would be really awesome having you with me and engaging with you. So, a lot of parents say, my child used to be kind and calm, and like in the past couple of months, things kind of amped up. It feels as if they are forcefully like not listening to us, and they like would look you in the eye and not respond to what you need. And we see it often in the 3 to 7 age group, and then we see it with the teenagers. Now both are developmentally in two different spaces, so I'll try to cover both sides of the coin. But what something that we often don't pay attention to is we do not take into account what happened throughout the past year. Now, the last time we chatted, the last time we got together, we spoke about the impact that COVID has had on us as parents. The lockdown, the almost being constantly living in fear. And if you go and look at how schools at the moment, whether your child is at school or being homeschooled, but specifically when how the schools are at the moment, there's a lot of rules and regulations in place that almost steals the joy of schooling for the kids. They don't get to socialize like they used to. They don't get to have break time like they used to. They have to wear a mask, which makes communication a bit difficult. Even though a lot of kids have proven that when they're wearing their masks, they even forget that they're wearing it because they're used to wearing a mask. Um, but there's a couple of social hurdles, but there's also that anxiety and that strictness of the sanitizing of the hands and taking the temperature and going through the rigmarole of entry that actually elevates their sense of acute awareness of life can be a bit tricky at the moment, and I need to be scared of what's going on in life at the moment. That, like we've spoken about our own mental fatigue, our kids are currently experiencing mental fatigue. They are trying to adapt to a world that has dramatically changed in the past year. And often, with our expectation of our kids to be resilient, we forget that they're also grieving the freedoms that they used to have. They are grieving a process of what life used to be like and what it's now. Added to that, kids actually take longer to adjust to change than what we are willing to admit. We as adults really sometimes struggle to adapt to change. Sorry, I've got an itchy nose. We sometimes struggle with adapting to change and adapting to that constant pressure that we feel when we're living in a high stress situation. Our kids are literally going through the same, but their brains are far less developed than ours. So they are going to act out. They are going to push harder against boundaries. They're going to try and tell you that I'm not capable of regulating because my brain is not developed as advanced as yours as an adult. Added to that, I am being hyper aroused. Now, how the brain works with hyper arousal, if someone is in a stressful situation, their fight or flight area of their brain is basically aroused. So it keeps on waiting for something to go wrong. And living in a state, like living conditions, where we are constantly being pressured or in a situation where we constantly worry about safety, our fight or flight centers are constantly elevated. So what happens is it takes a small thing to tip them off. a small situation to send them reeling. When we spoke about the Coke bottle effect, we spoke about how they keep everything inside and then when they get home, they explode. The same with our 3 to 7 year olds. Besides the Coke bottle effect, it plays into them trying to find some semblance of control over something in their life. And that plays a significant role, especially in our environment that we're in right now. Now, often it's a developmental phase where they test out authority, they test out their own power, they test out their own control because they're trying to mimic parents. They're trying to figure out how they fit into this village or into the society that they live in. So they're already going to, between the age of 3 and 7, push boundaries much harder than what they used to do. They are going to back chat more often. They are going to speak in tones of voice that you don't necessarily appreciate because their brain development is only starting now to work on emotional regulation and on impulse control. That process only finishes when someone is at the age of 25. So they are in the beginning stages. They're literally learning to walk when it comes to emotional control and emotional regulation and impulse control. Now, if we in a heightened state, we already know that even us as adults, when we're stressed out, when we're dysregulated, it's very difficult to not do the impulse buy in the shop, like buy the chocolate or um, to snap at someone and to lose your own emotional regulation. Our kids are stressed. They are going through dramatic change. They were in school, now they're home. Parents were home. Now that some parents went back to work. So it's been a year of consistent and constant change. There's no security really in their day to day or what to expect because everything happened very quickly, or at least for them, very suddenly. We often forget to have communication with our kids, like when with we there is information given out, to sit down with our kids and say, okay, so this is what's going on, this is what they said, this is the new regulations, this is where we're at, and just actually talking it through to them, no matter their age. We just introduce them, oh, this is the change. So there's no preparation, there's no um, process of working through this change. They immediately just need to adapt or die. And living in a society or in a space where you can't really bank that tomorrow morning I'll be able to go to school because maybe tonight when I go to bed there's an announcement that all the schools will close, um, or there's an announcement that everything will open up again. Cannot actually go to bed and know that tomorrow will be similar to today. So I need to find ways to control things around me. So what do? I start trying to take more control over things that make sense. That is why, for a lot of parents that is going through the potty training phase, your child sometimes takes longer than what you've read on blogs and things like that. And the reason they're taking longer is they're trying to take control over something. Or they get more finicky about the food they eat, or they start pushing boundaries a bit harder than what you're used to. Their tone of voice changes. They are already hyper vigilant. And while trying to control their emotions, which they hardly have any control over, um, their tone of voice becomes sarcastic or whiny, or just a tone of voice that you think, oh my word, um, that feels disrespectful. But this disrespectful tone of voice, or the tone of voice our kids use when they're trying to exert control, is something that we actually have to take a serious look at ourselves as parents. And this is the part that is like always a tad bit uncomfortable for us as parents to have a conversation. And that is, if when I try to take control over a situation and I start using a yelly voice, or I don't use a calm voice, um, I get sarcastic, or I start screaming, or I even start whining. Um, my children in 3 to 7 group actually is at a stage where that is how they copy your behavior, they mimic your behavior. So when your child is speaking to you in a considerably disrespectful voice, go and look at how you've been speaking to your child due to the fact that you've been overly stressed, the fact that you are actually experiencing COVID exhaustion, mental exhaustion in this whole process. And if you can honestly look yourself in the eye and say, okay, you know what? I have not been speaking in a disrespectful voice to my child. I've been speaking calmly when they push boundaries. I've maintained, that's the example that I've set is respectful and calm. Then you can look at, okay, so that means they're struggling with emotional regulation, they need more security. What safe choices and real choices can I give my child to get them a sense of that they have some semblance of control over things, whether it is what they wear or what they eat or helping to make their lunch tin, those kind of conversations, or what is the chores that they're involved with, sitting with them and working through things, having honest conversations with them, and helping them learn how to name the emotion, how to process the emotion, and to acknowledge that, yes, we are living in a space that is not what we're used to. It's not what is the norm. It's not that kind of space, but they are pushing back. Before we get to the teenagers, guys, please remember to hit that like button. Let me know that you're here. If you're watching this on replay, please type in hashtag replay. It really helps out the channel. So let's just dive into what our teenagers, or the group older than 7. Their brain is, if we think that 3-year-olds is trying to exert control and trying to understand where they fit into the village, basically until around about the age of 10, that brain development has basically gone to a point where now everything needs to be consolidated. And that consolidation takes another 15 years. That consolidation is, I take everything that I've learned in this past 10 years, and now I am putting it into practice, and I'm taking more and more and more personal responsibility for things. Do I mess up? Absolutely. But I'm craving more freedom. If a children from the moment of birth, their whole their whole mental driver, their whole life driver is independence. And when a teenager is going through the hormonal changes, they're going through a stage where the brain is literally pruning itself to shape it into an adult brain. um, they are experiencing things that they cannot necessarily verbalize. Add extra stress or COVID fatigue, and you once again have the same kind of recipe that you have in the 3 to 7 year olds. You have the emotional dysregulation, you have the irrational thought processes. It sometimes feels like you're talking to a wall. They test out the structural integrity of the house. They stomp their feet. They sigh deeply when you speak to them, which is all teenage things, but it gets amplified due to the COVID mental health fatigue and the elevated stress that they are experiencing, and also the fact that due to the restrictions, while their whole brain and their whole being is telling them, go out, go explore, go take over the world, they can't, because everything is limited. Their social interaction is limited. Their social interaction at school is limited. Their freedoms becomes more and more and more limited due to the situation that the world is currently experiencing. So, but hopefully, okay, that will change soon, and especially with vaccine rollouts. Um, it will be able to open up a bit more, and you'll see your teenager will start rebelling less. But the stricter we are trying to be, the more we're trying to control the situation and control our kids, the more we're going to lose, and we more and more we're going to step into a power battle. Being a parent does not always mean being in control and being the person in power. It means being the coach, being the guidance, being the person that has a calm and rational conversation with our kids, no matter their age, and helping them to learn the boundaries, helping them to process emotions, whether it is positive or whether it's negative emotions, and helping them build pathways for in their brain to understand this is how society fits in, acknowledging that, you know what, everybody is tired of this now. We are not as vigilant as we are. I actually had a conversation with someone yesterday where we recognized that um, you kind of get a bit lax on certain things until someone close to you actually gets diagnosed, and then all of a sudden you get a bit more vigilant again. And that is the normal flow, ebb and flow. But at schools and all of that, the moment the kids try to, like, when they get fatigued and they try to relax on things, they are harshly and usually very strongly reminded that nope, this is, and that vigilance, that hyper vigilance, is basically forced upon them. So how do we parent this? First thing is give them choices. Always give them choices. Give them something that they can control. I would personally not be surprised if we actually have more eating disorders with teenagers going through the COVID pandemic, and more rebellious behavior, more things that actually is damaging to teenagers, abuse of substances, due to the fact that they are trying to control something in their life that is not controlled by adults, not controlled by country laws, not controlled by something they can control for themselves. So, in our homes, let's reevaluate how we put in our boundaries. How do we allocate chores? How do we engage our kids, young and old, in their involvement in the house and give them some control over things that becomes their responsibility and gives them a certain sense of freedom, a certain sense of, okay, I can do this. Whether it is saying, okay, you know what, once a week, it is a free for all regarding dinner. I'll put out stuff that's available to eat. You help yourself and you can choose what you eat. Or um, you have X amount of chores to do in the house to contribute to the household, but there's certain chores that you really didn't choose, you really don't like. Let's negotiate that and let's swap out and work through that. Or um, you're losing you don't really feel like cleaning your room right now because that's the kind of space, mental space, that you're in. Would you mind, especially with a teenager, it's so important, you cannot go into a teenager's room and just clean the room for them. First of all, it teaches them to not clean up after themselves, but it also violates their privacy. So maybe offer and say, listen, yeah, I know that you are struggling at the moment with everything that's going around with you. Would you want me to help you clean up your room? We can say on a Saturday morning, the two of us tackle your room together. You throw away what you need to throw away that Saturday. I'm not going to make those kind of decisions, but how can I help you work through this and be a support structure for you instead of just leaving them trying to fend for themselves? Everybody at this particular point in time, adults and kids, needs support in this specific space. We're all hyper vigilant. We're all super aware of our fragility as human beings. We are all exhausted from this constant barrage of new information, things that we have to process, and having to try and keep everybody safe. As adults, we suffer from this. The kids are suffering from it as well. So just remember, a kid that usually is easy, go with the flow, even when they are hyper vigilant and really hyper aroused in their vigilance, they will start acting out, because what they're acting out is saying to you, listen here, I'm feeling out of control, I'm scared, I need help me please. So do not punish them, do not take away stuff and go all out like, no, it's got to be discipline. No, no, no. I know you as a parent want to have control, but your kids are not robots. They are not little mannequins that you can control and they have to like walk. They're human beings. And as a society and as a humanity, we're all struggling and we're all going through a difficult time. So take a breath. Remember, if your child is in 3 to 7 years old, they're copying you most of the time. Take a breath, smile, wave, go through the motions, and understand that they are also just struggling, and they're only 3 or only 7, only 5. If it's a teenager, yes, they're 16 already, but they're struggling and they're feeling out of control. How can we help them to get more control? How can we create home to be a safe harbor where they can freely admit the space that they're occupying at this particular point in time? Guys, remember to like the video, subscribe if you have not subscribed yet. Please stay safe, wash your hands, wear your mask, and get vaccinated. Um, love you all. Cheers.